And we introduce on the program, I believe, from across the pond, it is Joel Anand Samy, the host of America's Roundtable, the radio program, one of the finest we have on this network, and also co-founder of International Leaders Summit. Joel, good morning to you, sir. It's good to see you. You are across the pond?
Yes, indeed, Paul. And a very good morning to you from the European continent. And it's wonderful to hear the Christmas music in the background on your program. And it's a delight to be on the Paul Gallo Show.
What is Christmas like when you're there in Europe?
Christmas in Europe, they have a lot of these great traditions. If you go through Austria or Croatia, Italy, they have these Christmas markets that you're able to walk through and enjoy the sights, the sounds. They have their coffee, they have their hot red wine that they offer in these cold settings. And it's very memorable, to say the least.
Yeah. Is it like us with a lot of the lights and things, that they use the lights the same way?
Absolutely. In much of Europe, Eastern Europe specifically as well, you have a lot of the festivities, the lights, the full-blown presentation of what Christmas really means. And so it's very refreshing to see that, especially in Eastern Europe, the post-communist part of this part of the continent.
Because we talked off air and on camera before we got on. And Natasha's not going to be with us today, right?
Indeed. She sends her warmest greetings to you, Paul, and we're all getting busy, ready for the Jerusalem Leaders Summit coming up in just 2 weeks' time.
Okay, let's turn our attention to item number one, the Ukraine. Things have changed there. There's some things that are changing and some things that remain the same. The people who are hurting, the people who are dying, it continues. There's an atmospheric environmental change, Washington, D.C., that pretends the coming of the Republican Party taking control in the House. I want to play you one thing here. This is from a very outspoken guy, and he's gaining more and more notoriety. He's a congressman from Texas. This guy's name is Chip Roy, and he's one of these that stands up and takes he doesn't take too many volunteers. He takes the enemy out, and here he goes.
Debate Ukraine. All of us, let's get down. Let's get it. Let's carve up time. How about 5 days? Let's debate Ukraine. We've given them $70 billion. And now the administration's asking for $37 more billion. Any of y'all got $107 billion sitting around? Well, guess what? Neither do we. We're just going to print more money. We're just going to print more money, send it to Ukraine, allegedly for a helpful goal of trying to help Zelensky stand up against Putin. Where's all that money going? Is any of that money going into the hands of certain companies that's then turning around and sending it to certain politicians here? Certain stories seem to indicate so. Any of that money going to oligarchs in Ukraine? Any of that money going into the hands of China? A lot of stories about all of that.
What he's referencing is the Sam Friedman, the FTX deal. There are some talks about maybe some of that money went in from cryptocurrency to dollars, and from dollars went into that. We do know that millions and millions of dollars went to finance some advertising campaigns and also ground troops for the Democrats during the election itself. But from where you stand, and I know you're deeply involved in this, what are your thoughts on the continued support of the Ukraine from the United States?
Well, as you know, Paul, we are now entering the 10th month of this conflict, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a sovereign state. And yes, as we all stand for freedom, and we certainly respect the sovereignty of Ukraine, and we are trying to, certainly back and support the Ukrainian people, we've got to take a step back and see what the Biden administration has done. We have seen over the past 10 months an embargo that has failed. It has not deterred Putin and Moscow's military might from waging war. We have seen, as the congressman from Texas, Chip Roy, has mentioned, that now by the end of the year, we may be sending over $100 billion in military aid. And let's put that into perspective, if we may. The military budget for 2021 in Russia was just only $66 billion. The UK spent $68 billion, and France only $56 billion. So here we're giving $100 billion to Ukraine in a span of 1 year without any accountability or responsibility or transparency. So I think Congressman Chip Roy is right to ask these questions, and I would certainly encourage our Republican friends on Capitol Hill to actually exert greater responsibility in finding out where the money is going, because Finland is reporting that some of it is coming into the black market now.
I think there are two parts of this, Joel. Is number one, we have a disagreement that there are some people who have a disagreement, number one, that we're supporting a country that calls itself a democracy, when those who know history and certainly the present day history of what's going on, you couldn't classify that as a real democracy under Zelensky, the way the things were going on in the Ukraine. And secondly, the disappointment or the disagreement, I think, centers around a lot. Okay, we're sending them money, but we have no idea. We don't. First of all, we don't even trust this administration. We certainly don't trust Zelensky or the people that have their hands in this. And how in the hell are they using this money at the same time where you go to the grocery store and you come away depressed here in this country, and at the same time where the military is getting cuts as far as the paychecks and everything else. So it's based on not just one thing. We're not supporting Ukraine. It's the way that this administration and the leadership that's doing this. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. What we see is weak U.S. leadership, and that is making an adverse impact, not just only on the European continent, but we see also in the theater of operations in Southeast Asia. So when a president of the United States is working towards appeasing another leader and actually going to Saudi Arabia, as we've seen, and begging for a better price on oil, that's not leadership. And in fact, as a great many critics would say and argue, that if there was strong leadership, Putin would not have invaded Ukraine as we saw that took place 10 months ago. So yes, there is weak leadership, and the way that the administration, the Biden administration, is trying to support Ukraine and trying to bolster NATO, it's really an ad hoc approach. There really isn't a strategy. And our good friend Victor Davis Hanson, a military expert and historian, shared with us on our radio program at America's Roundtable, which is aired on SuperTalk Mississippi Media. He shared that you have to understand the history of Russia. When they go into a war trying to protect their borders, they always win. And if you look at the last couple of 100 years of history in Russia, there was a lot to be said about their history, their culture, all that they're doing. Now, we're not saying we're supporting Putin, but we have to understand history. And in the case of Putin, if there was any kind of attack or strike against Russia, there was going to be a resulting collective response from the people of Russia. Yeah. Just look at their history and what they did to Nazi Germany.
Let me ask you this, and as a student to you, the teacher here, because I don't know, should he have been successful, already done, certified, and he takes over that small part of the Ukraine that was more Russia than Ukraine, according to him, and even some of the people wanted to be back to Russia, is what you hear. What kind of damage would that have done to the United States of America, militarily, financially, et cetera, when compared to the amount of money that we've already put into that one? I want you to answer that when we come back. In other words, if it only was shock and awe and only took about a couple of weeks to do and it was done, and Ukraine, that part of Ukraine now, is part of Russia, are we worse off because of that and in a risk as far as the security of the United States from the Russian people? That answer coming up from a guy who knows. It's Joel Anand Samy, and he will be back in just a moment with the final segment. Hang on. Okay, let's get back with Joel Anand Samy from America's Roundtable, the radio program that's heard every weekend right here on the SuperTalk Network. To go back to the question, if he had won or does win in the future, how much more of a risk are we from the involvement that we're in now?
Well, I think truthfully, as you've stated, Paul, is the fact that NATO is going to be buffering this very aggressive behavior by Russia and Putin, and we're not in a good place at the moment. As you know, that President Putin has communicated time and time again that he may use nuclear weapons, and so we are getting closer to confronting a nuclear-powered and Putin is definitely communicating that more and more these days than ever before. He's targeting the energy infrastructure in Ukraine. So NATO is not in a very good position at this moment. And we have certainly issues with and concerns about China. We're concerned about where India is in this whole geopolitical dynamic as well. So as we look at going forward, even America's military readiness is at an all-time low. As we send all these weapons to Ukraine, we're depleting our own resources. And who's going to be able to fill that stockpile that we used to have at one time? So our military is not prepared, and we're sending over the money, and NATO is not in a good position.
I look at it as a layman, but I know for us, we fought the longest war, 13 years in Afghanistan, not anything to show for it, certainly the way we left. 13 years, and during that time, it drained us financially as a country. The only people who came out better, whether you like it or not, were the non-governmental military infrastructure who were sending weapons over there and support. The same cannot be said because it's not a capitalistic society in Russia. So if they have to deal with this on a long, drawn-out basis, it depletes them, and I look at it that way. The other part of this is, do we want the Ukraine to become part of NATO?
I think that would be a strategic mistake on the long run. In fact, as we've we have to understand the history of Russia, the history of Eastern Europe, before we just take this blind leap of faith and just expecting sort of an idealistic world out there. We have to understand the cultural dynamics and all that Europe has gone through over the past several hundred years. And at this stage here, it would be certainly prudent for America to actually not get involved as much as it has done so in this conflict. And we are involved in a proxy war with Russia today. It's not just only supporting Ukraine, we are confronting Putin's Russia, and a nuclear-armed one at that.
Joel, how do you think this ends?
Well, as we know about history and looking at history's records of how Russia came together to defeat its adversaries in the past, and how Russia came together to defeat Nazi Germany. We certainly laud the fact that America's troops in World War II, along with Britain and our other allies, made significant strides against Nazi Germany. But we somewhat forget that it was the Russian military that also aided the American troops in defeating Nazi Germany. So when it comes time to protect their sovereignty, as we know, history shares it very clearly that there is that collective response. So as far as how does this end here, it's certainly the ball is in Putin's court in that respect. But I would say that it would be wise for the Western leaders to basically head to a negotiating table and resolve this immediately. Prolonging this is not going to do anyone any good.
Does it worry you, the camaraderie now, it seems, or at least their meeting as far as between China and Russia? Certainly
well,
with the strategic oil and things such as that.
Well, it's always a concern when you see a emboldened China, a brazen China, issuing threats in regard to Taiwan, certainly forging stronger ties with Russia. And then keep in mind, they also went over to Saudi Arabia. We had President Xi go to Saudi Arabia and offer assistance and partnership and all of that. And it comes back to what we talked about earlier, Paul. When there is weak U.S. leadership, as we see today, of course, our rivals are going to take advantage of it. And what we need in America is strong leadership at the executive level, but also from the Senate and the House of Representatives as well.
I can't figure out which is the biggest nemesis. Is it Russia, Ukraine, or the country of the Democrat Party? Because the country of the Democrat Party seems to be an even bigger threat. I wish we had more time because I'd dovetail into the Puerto Rican situation where they want to make it a statehood to preserve the party, but we don't have more time. But you guys have all the time in the world. Who's the guest this weekend?
We have Governor George Allen joining us this weekend, and on Christmas, New Year's, we're going to have Kathy Lee Gifford for a special Christmas presentation.
Tell Natasha a very Merry Christmas and the same to you, and I think it's always a pleasure having you on. Take care.
Merry Christmas to you, Paul, and your great listeners.
Thank you.